Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
To the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis, and we're back here for another great show on the GSMC Podcast Network, once again talking about all things basketball. Obviously, we are through our first official full weekend of basketball games from the restart. Obviously, we've seen a lot of great performances, a lot of interesting, things, some injuries. So far, there's been no positive tests, everything like that. So, everything's been good. Everything's been good. I would say everything's been working out pretty well. We've seen some great basketball. And so, on today's show, we're going to get into all different types of topics from the past weekend in basketball. Obviously, I'm going to talk about how I think that maybe this break actually is going to be the best thing that's happened for the league. Also, I'm going to give my initial impressions of which teams have impressed me and which teams haven't. Also, we're going to break down the chase for 8th in the West. And are the Toronto Raptors, the defending champions, a serious contender? And other basketball news that's happening all around the association. So, obviously, we have a jam-packed show for you today. And like I said, we're going to talk about everything around the association. So, obviously, like I said, we went through a weekend of games. A lot of performances, big performances by a lot of different players. Westbrook, Harden, James, Kyle Lowry had a big game, everything like that. And while I was watching the games this weekend, I kind of thought about something. I thought about how, if you think about it, usually through an NBA season, you play 82 games. And what's one thing that most players don't usually do nowadays? Play 82 games, because it's a lot of games. And especially if you're a playoff team, you want to make sure you're as fresh as possible for the playoffs. So now, think about everything that's happened. You played up to March, which was about 60 games for the most part. And then you took a 4-month break, right? Now, think about this. Teams that are going to be in the playoffs, or they expect to be in the playoffs, or know they're going to be in the playoffs, they try to take games off. The starters rest, whatever, to get ready. So now, imagine with the 4 months that have been taken off, think about, the 4 months that have been taken off. Now every player is coming back. They haven't played basketball like that in 4 months. So everybody's fresh. Everybody's ready to go. Everybody's feeling good. And everything. If you think about it, I think this could lead to some of the best basketball we see played and some of the best, a lot of great performances now than we would have if the season went through. And let me give you an example. So obviously, if you think about it, James Harden has been criticized for how he performs in the playoffs. Some people like to say they use him so much during the regular season that he doesn't have the same legs, he doesn't have the same lift. His game isn't the same when playoff time hits. Plus, it's a more physical game. So now think about Harden just got 4 months off. He's probably as rested as he would be if the season started today. And now, think about the schedule construction. You're going to play up to potentially 3 months of basketball before the season ends. I calculated. You have 8 regular season games, 7-game series. So let's say you went to 7 games in all 4 series, from first to finals. That's 28. So at a max, you're playing a max of 36 games. That's over just a little bit over a quarter of an NBA season, a regular 82 game schedule, a regular 82 game stretch. So Harden dominates most of the regular season, especially in the beginning. So now he's returning and he's fresh. So wouldn't that mean that Harden now can be Harden? The Harden that we've seen during the regular season, during the playoffs, even now since the playoffs are about to start very soon, and he's fresh? I mean, I don't think what you've been seeing from Russell Westbrook and James Harden in the games they've played in is a coincidence. I think with them being both fresh, that's what you're going to see consistently from them on a night-to-night basis. Because now players who may be worn out, have nagging injuries, tired, the season grind, you never know who it actually really affects at the end of the day. That's why you have to be in tip-top shape to do it. But you don't know who it affects at the end of the day. So now imagine if you got 4 months off and then all you gotta do is play 36 games in total. And you may not even have to play 36. You can go hard and you can do what you do without feeling like, oh, I'm going to wear myself out because we have to play games later. I may have to take a night off because I got to be fresh for this. I think that this could actually lead to, better performances and players, being the best version of themselves they can be. Because nobody's going to say at this point in the season after 8 games, oh, we got nagging injuries, everybody's hurt. Nobody says that the 36th game of a regular season game. So I think outside of major injuries, you could see a potential increase in performances of all NBA players. Because everybody's fresh, everybody's ready to go. Everybody can play and play at a high level. And with that being known, it definitely presents itself in a way where now teams can just say, listen, we're going to put in the hands of our best players and they're going to go to work for us. This is definitely going to make the season, to me, increase in quality of basketball, in my opinion. Because it's going to help the James Hardens of the world. It's going to help every team. And then, like I said, think about the players who have now come back. Since if the season had continued, they would have never played. But now you have teams like Portland. I think Portland will benefit tremendously from having Nurkic back and Zach Collins back. I think, and then you still got CJ and Dame who are now fully rested, ready to go, because literally you could say with an 82 game schedule, you can kind of ease your way into the schedule. You don't have to play too hard at first. You just got to make sure you don't get too bad in the standings. Maybe you playing at 80% of your full potential is good enough to win most games, like Golden State a few years ago. They didn't have to play their best every game. Listen, they would sit here and lose to a horrible team, but in the playoffs they would sweep them. Because it shows you not everybody's playing up to the potential of what they could play at all the time. Now, with this short schedule, you have to play hard from day one. You can't say, oh, we can take this game off. Maybe if you're a number 1 seed, yeah, but even in that situation, you're trying to get back into playing shit because playoffs is about to hit. So you don't even have time to ease into it. You just look at trying to be better and trying to improve. And so I think what this does also is it makes, I honestly think both conferences are wide open to me. Yes, we think it's Lakers, Clippers, West, and it probably still is. But I really look at Houston as a big wild card team. If Russell and James play like they've played, you can't tell me they're not one of the best duos in the West. They're not just as good and can be just as good as LeBron and AD and Kawhi and Paul George. Because in that situation, and listen, we could talk about they're a small ball team. So Anthony Davis could have their way with him. And Montrezl could have his way with him. But at the end of the day, Eric Gordon can play. Robert Covington can play. PJ Tucker can play. I mean, Houston, to me, listen, they're not going to be a great defensive team because of it, but they can score. Because you know how they play. They're up and down, fast paced, shoot threes, and get to the rim. So you know how this goes. Houston, I think, is in a prime position right now. A absolute prime position. And I don't think anybody can disagree with that. I think Houston is in a great position. And it's not even just Houston. I think Miami, I think this helps them. I think this helped Milwaukee a lot because, I think just knowing everybody is fresh and ready to go, it really kind of helps out with the whole dynamic of everything that is going on and what they want to attempt and try to do. I really think that's what's happening here. I think Toronto is a team that, with this break, they were able to get Marc Gasol. Remember, Toronto has been hurt most of this year. Gasol was out alive, Ibaka missed games, Lowry missed games, Siakam missed games. And they still are a number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. So now everybody is healthy and ready to go for a 36-game stretch where if they can stay healthy, why, it could be a question. Why couldn't Toronto get out of the Eastern Conference? Yeah, I understand why we say it because they don't have that quote-unquote superstar like they had when Kawhi last year. But why? But obviously when they played the Lakers and they beat the Lakers, you kind of look at it like, okay, they're definitely a team. Even if they don't make it out, they're going to be a tough series because they're not going to lose because they made mistakes. They're not going to lose because the coaching was they're out coached. They're going to lose because your guys were just better than their guys and your guys made more plays. And if you lose in a series like that, you can't be mad as a coach or player. You do the circumstances. But if the team that's better starts to make mistakes, they are a team who can take advantage. And so I think it just really opens up a lot. Think about the Spurs right now. A lot of people, when this restart happened, even though we're going to get more deeper into it later in the show, thought the Spurs weren't going to really be relevant. But I think this break helped them. I think it helped them, especially with a coach like Greg Popovich, in the mind he is on the court. It may have helped him figure out, okay, so this is what we need to do. This is how we need to play. Because sometimes you need that reflection. There was, I don't know who did. I think Utah. It was in the Utah game. They said Dan Snyder. It's not Dan Snyder, but I know his last name's Snyder. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm getting Utah's head coach wrong, I apologize. But basically, they said in the game, he took the last 4 months to see what they were good at, what they struggled at, and tried to implement plans to help make those deficiencies not as deficient and also work on their strengths. One thing Utah you notice in the first 2 games is that at first, during the regular season, they didn't really go in the paint too much. Now they're like, yes, Rudy Gobert isn't known as an offensive player, but he is still bigger than most players. We still have an advantage against most teams when it comes to Rudy Gobert. So we need to go in the paint more. That maybe can help with our offensive efficiency. Like, these are things that a good head coach really thinks about. And I think a team like Popovich and them, great head coaches, will take this break and really try to figure out, okay, what should we change? What do we need to come back not doing? Because I'm sure you don't want to do the same things that you were doing during the regular season that was messing you up in the restart. Because you've had 4 months, even though you haven't been able necessarily to be in contact with the players, but at least create plans. So when you do see the players again, it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do different. And this is how we're going to execute it. And I think that that's going to be the biggest thing here to me is how do you fix and change things? And with the break, everybody's healthy, so you can go hard. Star players can be them. Don't have to worry about conserving their energy. You can just do what you got to do. And I think it can lead to a variance of increasing performance of basketball, great performances, and great basketball play altogether. But that's all we have here for this segment. Coming up next, I'm going to talk to you about the teams so far. And our short restart has impressed me the most, and which teams are starting to disappoint me a little bit after the first couple of games of everybody's schedule. Stay tuned.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, I discussed that I think this restart will help with the quality of games, quality of performances, and players, especially top players, being at the peak of their game at all times without any of those excuses of nagging injuries or anything like that, unless it's a major injury. Because now that everybody has taken the same amount of time off, everybody's basically coming back into this restart fresh. Teams that were injured at the point of the season and may have still been injured going into the playoffs now are healthy and ready to go. This could honestly be probably one of the best things that could happen for the league without them really even knowing. You know? And so I think that is something that definitely could benefit the league moving forward, you know? So, obviously, now we're going to get into some teams that I have been impressed by so far, and teams that haven't been so impressive, you know, from the restart, or maybe had higher expectations for them, but they haven't reached those expectations. So, listen. First team that's really impressed me so far is the Toronto Raptors. I think, you know, it's crazy because it feels like with Toronto, people consistently have questions if they can be a top-tier team without having a quote-unquote top-tier star, because their best player, I think a lot of people would say, like from a talent perspective, is Pascal Siakam. Even though Kyle Lowry is the heartbeat of that team and does a lot of the dirty work, we all know Siakam is probably the best player on the team. And we don't view him at a superstar level. We view him at an all-star level. So they don't have that superstar like they did in last year in Kawhi Leonard. And a lot of people think when it comes to the top-tier team in the East or in the West, you just don't see them being able to maybe compete against them because of it. But I also think that from this restart, you've seen one thing about Nick Nurse and why he's won Coach of the Year is because he gets the most out of all of his players. He maximizes everybody's potential. He puts all his players in the best position for them to be successful in their role. Because when you're a team that doesn't have that one major superstar, it has to be a team effort where everybody is doing their part very well. You know? So, obviously that makes a difference. And so that's why, you know, people always think he should be in the running for head coach of the year just because of the fact that he doesn't have a superstar this year and he's still producing a top team in the Eastern Conference. And through the two games, they have played Toronto Raptors basketball. They have played well. They played well defensively. And they're getting enough scoring punch offensively. I think there's one player who doesn't get enough credit, and that's Fred VanVleet. Fred VanVleet, honestly, ever since he entered the league, has been one of my favorite players. His name always fascinated me, VanVleet. Like, I've always been a fan of that name, and so I've always kept up with him because of it. And then, you know, he showed he can make big shots. VanVleet is someone that if you have on your team, you put him out there in clutch minutes because he can make that clutch shot. He could be a closer for teams in this league. He showed that in the finals, in everything. He's shown that in multiple games. That's why they think he's going to get paid okay this free agency. So, and then, Kyle Lowry, he just does everything. He defends. He could score. If Lowry's on it, like he was against the Lakers on Friday, he can do a lot. Actually, Saturday. He can do a lot. He plays extremely well for what they ask him to do. It's just all the pieces on Toronto come together. And there's one player we haven't talked about that was not a part of last year's run, and that was OG Anunoby. If you remember, I think right before the playoffs, he had to get a surgery for something. It wasn't like an injury. It was just like something I guess people get out. I can't remember what it was. But he had to get something removed, and then it kept him out for the entire playoffs, where he was actually available in the finals, but obviously at that point, they were just like, we're going to go with what we got. And now he's playing during this restart, during this run, and you see the flashes of OG Anunoby. He's a really good player. He can make some plays. So you clearly see, like, hey, Toronto has a lot of talent. So you got to give Toronto tons of credit for what they've done in the restart. Another team that's really impressed me has been the San Antonio Spurs. They were a team who a lot of people felt like, yeah, they had a chance, but it was just one of those things where you just like, they have a chance, but you just felt like, but realistically, you would see either the Pelicans or Portland as the two teams that would probably make it in before them. And now they're sitting in the driver's seat currently with 6 games left to be the 9th spot and make it into the playoffs. And it just goes back to the genius of Greg Popovich. It's one of those things with the Patriots in football and now the basketball with the Spurs. It's like, it seems like they shouldn't make the playoffs, but with them and that head coach and the coaching and the resilience of the players, you can never truly say they're out of it. You can never truly say it's done with. You can never truly say that they're not going to get there. You can never truly say that it's not going to happen. You literally have to come into the situation and it's almost like you kind of have to be open-minded in a way, like, they're still there. They're still hanging around. They're still, like, in that pole position to get in. And since they're in that position, how can we sit here and say they can't get in? I understand they're not a trendy pick. Spurs, you can consider them a boring team. They're not going to be the pick. I'm sure the NBA low-key don't want the Spurs to get in for ratings purposes, because nobody wants to see the Spurs and Lakers in the first round. I mean, let's just call it like it is. Nobody wants to see that matchup. But hey, excellence always shines over just that pop. If it don't matter if you got pop, if you can't actually do the little things to get you there, it ain't gonna happen. Now, obviously, we still have 6 games left before anything's been decided, but the Spurs still have some big matchups coming up against teams that they're battling against for that 8th spot, but they're a team that, don't be shocked if they get in. They've been really impressive to me. They've been extremely impressive to me through the restart so far. And then now we're going to go to teams that maybe haven't impressed me as much. One team I think has been disappointing everybody so far, and that's really the Pelicans, because people feel like they met these many teams competing for the 8th spot in the Western Conference because of the Pelicans, because they wanted Zion in there. The first disappointment is the fact that we have not seen Zion a lot. Because you gotta think, the NBA's not trying to put Zion in the playoffs just for him to play 10, 15, 20 minutes. They're expecting him to play 30, 35 and make big plays. So that's probably something that's not helping. Then just the fact that first game of the season, they had Utah. They could have beat Utah. They lost that game. They didn't execute down the stretch. And some people still, and like me, I believe, if Zion played in that stretch, they probably would have beaten them. And then obviously the Clippers game was just disappointing because you saw what happened. They got lit up in the first half and just never recovered. So they're under a lot of pressure because now they've lost 2 games. It's like they basically have to win out at this point. Now, their schedule is favorable by the fact that they have a lot of matchups that are going to probably make or break if they get in or not. Like, they have a lot of matchups that have them in position to potentially get in. If they can win out, I would think the Pelicans would be the team to go in there and be the nice spot to get to the playoffs. But they have to play better if they're going to get somewhere. And another team that's disappointed me so far, also, I'm kind of disappointed by the 76ers a little bit because, listen, TJ Warren had a great game, but I don't know. This was the 76ers' chance to really show up and show out and show we're healthy. We are a team that you need to be talking about as one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, and we're going to prove it and make a statement against, a team that they potentially could go in the first round and battle against. I believe currently the Sixers are 6th, so they needed to win that game to get to 4th, because I believe right now they will play Boston. Obviously, you'd rather play the 4th seed, which I believe is Miami, and then we'll see what happens from there. But they're playing Boston if they stay at 6, and that's why that loss to the Pacers was big for them. And so the 76ers need to kind of listen. So far, I believe they only played a game, maybe 2. But they got to win. They got to start looking better. Because if they don't, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look good for them. Because I'm telling you, depending on how they perform, you might push Elton Brand to have to still make a decision and say, we might really have to let them go. We really might have to say, hey, we're gonna have to trade one of you, and we're gonna have to restart with one of you as the star, and then the other guys starring somewhere else. So we'll have to. It's something you just got to stay attuned and stay on top of. So it's just going to be very interesting to see and keep a lookout on, to me. So we'll have to see. And there's also one more team I want to talk about before we get out of here for this segment that really impressed me, and that's the Oklahoma City Thunder. Probably the best story of this entire NBA season. And then the way they came out there and handled the Utah Jazz. I mean, listen, we get that they may not be a team that's going to win the championship. But if they can get a favorable first-round matchup, I mean, I would not be shocked if they won a series. Their team just fits so well together. And Chris Paul is the engine that makes it all go. And if he plays the way he can play, and Dennis Schroeder continues to be one of the best 6 men, and then, Silges Alexander continues to play well, and Steven Adams does his thing, and just everybody does what they do best, Oklahoma City's going to push somebody. Listen, they're going to push somebody, and they're a team that I think you definitely don't want to play. Honestly, if Oklahoma City gets to that 5th spot and somehow Utah stays in there, I would not be shocked if people say Oklahoma City would win that series. I wouldn't. I would not be surprised at all. I can see why. Not just because of the game, but I think the matchup in general. What makes Utah better than Oklahoma City, realistically? Because Utah's biggest loss was Bojan Bogdanovic. He averaged 20 a game for them. He was the other scorer outside of Donovan Mitchell. Now they're having to still look for that second scorer. And if they have a hard time scoring and they're not as good as they've been the last few years defensively, you don't think Oklahoma City, who plays both offense and defense, can do something with that series and take a couple of games? I'm telling you, Oklahoma City is a team you definitely need to keep an eye on and watch out for, because they will be around and they will be a very exciting team to watch play. And they've always also had very aesthetically pleasing uniforms to me. I've always loved their uniforms, so. Well, that's all we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the chase for the 8th spot in the Western Conference. Plus, we're also going to discuss, I've already talked about, obviously, Toronto this segment, but we're going to go into more deeper detail. Is Toronto serious contenders to defend their title during this restart? Stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed how my initial impressions so far of teams, who's impressing me and who isn't. I gave about probably, I want to say 3 teams that were able to impress me and a couple teams that have been disappointing me a little bit so far. So obviously that's been a big deal for me. You know, seeing what's going on and really just doing my evaluation of how the basketball I've seen is going. But now, this segment, obviously, the Eastern Conference is kind of relevant in this situation when it comes to their 8th spot, because the Wizards are just, no, it's not happening. But, the Grizzlies in their 8th spot is very highly contested by a lot of teams out in the Western Conference. Obviously, if you remember, the teams that have came back to the restart were the Suns, the Kings, the Pelicans, the Trailblazers, and the Spurs. And they're all trying to get to that 9th spot, which is currently occupied by the Grizzlies. So obviously there's a big race to see who's going to get that spot. So, here's the thing. Now, Memphis so far hasn't necessarily played their best basketball. I believe they've lost their 2 games that they've played so far. So they haven't necessarily helped themselves gain ground underneath the teams. And so, you know, they haven't had the best start. Though they still have a 2-game lead, so they still have some leeway. Obviously, they were always in a prime position to get the play-in game because they were already in the 8th spot. It would be kind of a big disappointment, and I think a very big shame, if somehow they ended up not even being in a play-in game at the end of the day. Because you got 6 games left. You know, they have to start winning. Because if they don't, it's not going to look good. And, you know, as much as, you know, people love John Morant, it's not just going to have to be John Morant to get the job done. It's going to have to be a whole team effort. So there's a lot depending on it here. I think Memphis understands the position they're in. They understand, you know what I'm saying, the position that they want to be in. And I think, you know, they're still technically in the driver's seat right now. So they just have to maybe win a couple of games. That's the thing about the 8 games, people. Literally, Memphis probably can win 3 more games and lose the next 3, and that'll be good enough to get them into the play-in game. Like, they really can win the fewest amount of games here and still get the play-in game, depending on what happens beneath them. So they're still in the driver's seat. Obviously, like I said, the Spurs have been shocking everybody, you know, winning 2 games. You know, they were behind the Blazers and Pelicans by only, I think, a game and a half. So the fact that now they're up a half game on the Trailblazers, I mean, it's not surprising. And right now, they're in the driver's seat right now as well. Now, it's only a half a game, so all it takes is Portland winning a game, Spurs winning a game, and that'll probably flip in reverse. But like I said, Greg Popovich deserves a lot of credit for what he's done with this team. He deserves a lot of credit for what, he's had and what he's been using to make sure this team is still playing at a high level, even during the restart. And I mean, they're just trying to do what they got to do to be successful at the end of the day. And I think you can't hate somebody for that. You can't be mad at somebody for that. And it really shows. It shows. So, the Spurs are currently just, if they continue to play this way, they could be the team getting that playing game against maybe Memphis at the end of the day. Number 10, the Portland Trailblazers are, like I said, a half a game back. Played very well against good teams. They barely lost to Boston yesterday after coming roaring back. Portland, you definitely can see that having their full team together, you can see this is a different team, and they can compete with some of the top teams in the league. Portland is, like I said, I think everybody knows from a talent perspective, would be the best matchup for the Lakers from a talent perspective. Because if you think about all the teams here, Memphis doesn't have a true superstar. The Spurs don't have a true superstar. Zion, we can't technically say he's a superstar yet, even though he has the potential to be a superstar, and Ingram's a really good player. The Kings, De'Aaron Fox, star but not a superstar. Suns, Devin Booker doesn't get the respect of a superstar, so a lot of people say he's a star. Portland's the only guy that has a proven superstar in Damian Lillard and a good star in CJ McCollum. So, from a talent perspective, they're the most talented team out of everyone who's left. So they probably could give the Lakers the most run for their money. Plus, I think, I said with Nurkic and Zach Collins coming back, I think from a matchup perspective, they match up really well with the Lakers. Because, they have a good complement of big men. They have a complement of big men. It's going to be a battle of who can just make the most stops and whose stars are going to play the best. So, Portland, I think, still also is in the driver's seat, in my opinion, because, listen, if they're going to be jockeying back and forth for position with the Spurs, then I guess that's how it's going to be. And, listen, we're just going to have to see how it goes. We're going to have to see what happens here. I think, like I said, Portland's a really good team. And honestly, regardless of how we feel about, Zion Williamson, the Pelicans, other teams, they are the team that I would personally would like to see in the playoff, in the playoffs as well. Especially after making it to the Western Conference Finals last year as they did. Not making the playoffs for the Pelicans would be an extremely big disappointment. Obviously, the Pelicans, losing the first two games, have a favorable schedule. They're playing a lot of teams that's ahead of them right now. They don't play Portland, but they play Memphis. They play San Antonio. They play the Kings. So it's going to be important for them to win those games. Because not only are you winning and gaining a half game, you're beating the team that maybe is in front of you, so you're gaining that extra game or extra half game on them to move up. So those are going to be big wins if they can win that game. They can literally flip standings and get tiebreakers if they win those games. Those are the crucial games they have to win. Obviously, if they won that Utah game, that probably would have helped them tremendously at the end of the day. But, listen, they still, a lot of people feel like are in control of their destiny. They just have to go out there and play well and win. If they do that, they'll be in good shape and they'll be ready to go when it's time for it to get down. And obviously, like I said, the whole impression is that the NBA wants the Pelicans in the playoffs because of the needle mover that Zion Williamson is, and they feel like it would be a great marquee matchup to advertise between LeBron James, Zion Williamson going head to head, even though maybe from a actual matchup perspective, the Lakers could sweep the Pelicans. So that's kind of what's going on there. And then obviously we have the Kings. Kings have not played well from the restart. De'Aaron Fox has had some big games since the restart's been back, but obviously the Kings just aren't, getting wins. They were one of the teams when they were brought back looked like a far-fetched. They were like, it doesn't look likely. I mean, listen, they're only a game and a half out of the ninth spot, so they can still technically win 2 games, and then something happens to the Spurs and Pelicans and Blazers, and boom, they're in the ninth spot now. So they're still in the driver's seat too. Like I said, it's very tightly contested down there at the 8th spot between 8 and 12. And then you have the Suns, who actually, it's funny, they've won 2 games, and they're only 2 games out. They're the only team so far outside the Spurs that have won all their games since the restart has happened. If the Suns continue to win some games, like, again, a lot of people thought the Suns were a long distance away. They might be able to sneak in to the playoffs. They might be able to sneak in. Obviously, that would be probably one of the more unlikely things people would happen, and it's just like, wow, do we really want to see a Phoenix Suns Lakers Devin Booker versus LeBron James matchup. I mean, listen, most people would think Memphis Lakers would sweep, Spurs Lakers would sweep, Pelicans could sweep, Kings could sweep, Suns could sweep. I feel like Portland's the only team that you feel confident they could get a game from the Lakers because of the talent they possess. The other teams is like, okay, I mean, is it going to actually be a competitive? Could this series maybe shock some people by how things go? I mean, all of it makes a difference. So it's kind of one of those things for me, you know. It's just something that, to me, it kind of shows, and it kind of shows up to me. And it's something I think is just going to be interesting to keep an eye on, I think, for the most part. To kind of see how things go, to see how things work out with this 8th spot standing. Because, listen, all these teams are battling for something, and they're going to try to do everything they can with the 6 games all these teams have left in return to make this the 9th spot. Because, listen, you're not necessarily trying to make the 8th spot. You're just trying to get into the 9th spot so you can get that play-in game to then get into the playoffs. And then we're going to get to this topic, too. A topic that's been raised. Obviously, we talked about in the last segment. The Toronto Raptors. Are the Toronto Raptors a legitimate championship contender? Are the defending champions a legitimate title contender? This has been a big debate. All because they don't have that quote-unquote superstar. Can they compete with the Bucks of the world, the Lakers of the world, the Clippers in the world in a 7-game series? You know, that's kind of the big question here. And in my personal opinion, I think they truly can. I think the level of players they have a lot of borderline all-star players to me, or players who really fit the role so well, it's like they can seem like an all-star in that role. I mean, think about it. You have a closer in Fred VanVleet. He can close games for you. He can make that big 3, that big shot to seal a deal. You have that guy in Kyle Lowry who does everything. He could have a big game for you, but if he doesn't have a big game statistically from a points perspective, he can get those rebounds. He had 14 against the Lakers. He can take those charges. He can defend the best player. He can disrupt things. Siakam, when he's on it, Siakam can make plays. You know, Siakam can have a big game. He can score. Also defend and be versatile. Ibaka, we know remember, they used to call him Serge Ibaka. Man, this man could still block shots. And he has the outside range. Marc Gasol, they have 2 of the best big man duo right there. Marc Gasol, we know what he's done, the veteran he is. We know what he's done in this league. We know what they all bring to the table. OG Anunoby coming into his own. Norman Powell can make plays off the bench. Every player they have can. It feels like they're one of those teams. You always have those teams where you have players, and maybe after the first 6, 7, or 8 players, you got 2, 3 players who really don't do that much. They're just there, just like, hey, play some defense, get a couple of rebounds, and then we need you for breaks. But they're not really like a very big part necessarily of what the team does in terms of success, in terms of winning. It feels like the Raptors, every player that comes to that floor really can dramatically impact if they win or lose the game. Like, really, that's how they are. It seems like, literally, they have a bunch of players who's like, listen, if they play well, they can impact if we win or lose this game. Because it's not like, I don't want to roast Andre Roberson, but trust me, if Andre Roberson don't score any points, we've seen in the past, it doesn't really affect them losing a game. I mean, obviously, if you can get like 16 points from Andre Roberson, that's huge, just because he doesn't score barely. But realistically, to me, he doesn't affect the outcome of the game, in my opinion. You may think he does, but to me, I don't. But the Raptors, I feel like every player affects it. If one player does not do what they need to do in that particular game, that could be the difference between them losing and winning that game. And that's just how I feel personally about it. So the Raptors, to me, I think could be a championship contender. And we need to start taking them more seriously because they're going to be around and they're going to be competing. And they're going to be in that semifinals and potentially Eastern Conference Finals. And they're going to, and listen, they have a crown to defend. They've been through the championship grind. They've been through the wars. They've went through the run. No other Eastern Conference team currently has. And that's an advantage they can say they have. But so, coming up next, we're going to get into some more basketball news and topics right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the race for the 8th spot in the Western Conference. We discussed each team individually, how they've done so far, and basically, just discussing the breakdown of everything that's happened. Like I said, each team has 6 games left, and everybody's within at least 2 games, I believe, of each other. So, still a lot can change if, a team has a little losing stretch. So, we'll have to see how it works out and how it turns out. And we talked about that. We also discussed, is Toronto a serious and true title contender? I gave my thoughts and opinions on that. I think that they definitely are. I think their team, even though they don't have a superstar, can still compete with the top teams in either conference. And listen, I'm sure at the end of the day, we're still going to maybe say in the series against the Bucks, Lakers, and Clippers, they're not going to be the favorites. But also at the same time, upsets can happen if the right things are in place for an upset to happen. So now we're going to talk about the top part of the Eastern Conference. Now, we've talked about the Raptors, so obviously we're not going to discuss the Raptors. We've discussed my thoughts on the Raptors. We're going to talk about the other top seeds in the Eastern Conference. And obviously we're going to go ahead and start with the Milwaukee Bucks. So far in this restart, Milwaukee seems like they have just picked up where they left off. Now, obviously, they lost to Houston in probably one of the better games of the weekend, obviously in the last minutes. It was funny. They lost a close game. And, Giannis talked about it after the game. He's like, it's cool and everything to be in these blowouts and everything and have games off. But we really haven't been in too many close games. So sometimes late game execution in a close game may not be there because the experience in terms of doing it as often is not there. But they picked up where they left off. They still look like a top team. Giannis still looks dominant as usual. He still seems like he hasn't lost a step. I mean, really, I feel like this restart has really been more for his teammates. His teammates getting back into form, rounding back into form, trying to, be better. And, just trying to, so they can reach their maximum potential for when the season gets to that point where playoffs hit, and now in the big series, in these conference finals, his teammates step up where Giannis is still doing, or if Giannis maybe didn't have the game that he usually would have, maybe a Chris Middleton or, a Kyle Korver or George Hill or somebody like that steps up and really, helps them get over the top of Wesley Matthews, etc. Because like I said, they still look very impressive. And that's very impressive to see a team like them look the way they've looked through everything that's happened. Obviously, the perception for longer term effect is, okay, if they win the series or they win the finals, you would think that would probably lead to them keeping Giannis. I think everybody would agree with that. But at the same time, if they lose, will that maybe keep the hope for Giannis to leave alive? Depending on how they lose, probably. Sometimes the way you lose can create something too. So that really just depends. But we'll have to kind of just see how it all works out at the end of the day for them, and see if it all ends up being where it should be when it gets down to it. You know, so we'll have to just see about that. Another team, obviously top part, is Boston Celtics. Now Boston, obviously, first game, they played well, but Jason Tatum didn't play well. He had probably one of his worst games, if not the worst game of the season, basically. You know, we don't know how much of that is just him not playing in real basketball for a while or anything like that. Maybe he just had an off game, but obviously everybody knows with Boston, they'll probably go as far as Jason Tatum can take them. And so you definitely don't need him having any more 2 for 18 performances. That's not going to get the job done. He has to play better, which he did in the game against Portland. Obviously, that game they had a lead, lost the lead, but was able to pull it out at the end. Boston's kind of looked a little uneven a little bit, but, you know, we'll see if Boston comes into their own by playoff time, and then through the playoffs, we may see that Boston team that we thought was the team that could be the dark horse to win it all. So it's something to me that we have to see. You know, they still have Gordon Hayward, Kemba, even though he's dealing with his knees, still got Kemba. Jaylen Brown still doing his thing. Marcus Smart, you know, he's not known as an offensive player, but if he has to score a bit of points, he can do it. Plus, obviously, we know about what he does on the defensive end. This team is very much, in my opinion, still constructed to compete at the top of the East. And like I said, these 8 games, I feel like for Boston, is just to get themselves back where they need to be where they got to be for when those big games come around, they'll be ready to go. I think these are what the games now are for them. It's just, okay, let's get ourselves where we need to be. Let's put ourselves in a better position to be successful, so that way when the playoffs hit and we start playing in meaningful series, we're where we need to be. Because listen, right now they're playing Philadelphia. As much as we say, how about Philadelphia not being that great or not playing up to expectations, it's still Philadelphia. They still have Embiid and Simmons. They still have a talented starting lineup. If Boston's not on it, they can be beat. All it takes was 76ers to snap out of it, and Boston's off their game, and then it's going the other way around. So, you know, Boston needs to be on it. They need to be on it. And if they can get on it, I think they'll be in good position. And the next team is the Miami Heat. Obviously, Miami is a team that, again, a lot of people as probably the second most picked dark horse team to maybe make it to the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe the NBA Final. Because, you know, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo have been so great for the Heat. And they have so many young guys who came in and played well. Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, Duncan Robinson. They've played well. Obviously, they added Iguodala. You know, they have a lot of, you know, Miles Leonard, you know, Kelly Olynyk. You know, they have a very well put together roster, and we don't talk enough about Eric Spoelstra and how great of a coach he is. You know, outside of the years of LeBron, remember, he still was able to get Heat teams with one star Dwayne Wade or anybody like that. He was still able to get them into the playoffs. And that's an accomplishment. He was still able to have teams that didn't have the greatest amount of talent relevant. At least to the point where they could still compete. And then when you get them some talent, you see they are a top team in the Eastern Conference for a reason. So Mickey, I think it shows in everything they do, because Miami's always been a first-class organization. And they show it in everything they do. So, for me, I think that Miami is a team that could shake some things up. I think they definitely could shake some things up. If they can upset a team like Boston or the Milwaukee Bucks, it will definitely change some things. And maybe we have to take the Heat a little bit more seriously than we have. Because not every person in the media has taken them seriously. Some people think that, they can maybe win a round and they'll be out of there and that's good enough. You know what I'm saying? Some people feel like, they're still very young. They might still need that extra year to get that experience in there. So we gotta pump the brakes on them really being able to shake things up. I mean, those are all relevant reasons. Because remember, Tyler Hero is first year in the league. Duncan Robinson really is getting his first significant play time. Kendrick Nunn, they haven't really been through the battles. Outside of Andre Iguodala, Miles Leonard, Kelly Olynyk, and Jimmy Butler, not a lot of Miami, and Goran Dragic to a certain extent, none of them have really been through that playoff grind. And Jay Crowder, he's been through it. I mean, but this Heat team does have but the thing is that they're looking at their most important, best players are the young players. And so, yeah, you may have that veteran leadership, but they're not going to be the ones that are going to probably get you to that place. It's going to be the young guys, and they may not just have enough experience yet. So it'll really depend on how far a Bam Adebayo or a Jimmy Butler can take a team like this. So it's something that they're going to have to see about later. And then the last team we're going to talk about, like I said, is the 76ers. Obviously, I've told you they haven't looked the best since they've came back. Obviously, losing the Pacers was a big one, since they probably wanted to try to crack the top 5. Now they've gotten some space between Indiana and the 76ers now. I mean, listen, from a talent perspective, just pure talent on a team, the 76ers have one of the most talented rosters. No doubt about it, in the entire Eastern Conference and in the league as well. So that's not a question in terms of lack of talent or anything like that. The question is putting it all together. The question is making it all work. They've struggled to make it work. That's what's been holding them back from reaching their potential. Everybody knows it watching them. That's been what's been holding them back. And they have to figure it out. Because you just don't know how long the Philadelphia Brass is willing to keep trying to give Ben Simmons and Embiid time. And it's funny because they were thinking for the longest, maybe it's Brett Brown, maybe they need a better head coach. But they keep keeping Brett Brown, and now they're like, well, maybe it's actually them. I mean, some people are actually looking at their games and saying, since Embiid needs the paint, and then Simmons doesn't have a jumper and he needs the paint, it might be better off. Because Simmons, since he has that great passing ability and that great run-the-show type of ability, playmaking ability, he may be better off in a team that doesn't have that dominating big man presence. He needs guys who can stretch the floor because he can penetrate. And then if he needs to, he has the playmaking ability to get it out to guys and the offense flow. Embiid, you can take it to a team where it's like if you want that insider presence, maybe he has more of a half-court game, wants to physically dominate you. Embiid would probably be that. You can revolve the team around him. He is the guy. Because it feels like with Simmons and Embiid, you've got to play two different styles, and if they're both on the floor, you can't play two styles in one series or one play. You either have to do more half-court or you kind of shoot threes and J's. And so Embiid can stretch the floor, but we all know with big men, even the star big men, yes, you can hit the three, but we primarily want you in the paint. And then take the three if it's there. You don't want Embiid lounging around the three-point line trying to find the three-point shot. Because then it takes away from what he really is good at. And also, obviously, percentages go down when shooting the three. So, you probably always want, because every possession, every NBA team wants probably the highest percentage shot they can potentially get. So, you know, that's my thoughts on some of the top seeds and top teams in the Eastern Conference. But that's all we have here, right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you guys letting me be a part of your day. Don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media at GSMC_basketball. GSMC_basketball on Twitter and other social media. Interact with us there. Love to hear what you guys got to say. And listen, stay safe out there. Everybody's happy basketball is back. I'm happy basketball is back. You got it almost every day, basically. Let's enjoy it while it's here. Let's hope the bubble still works and everything happens. So, this is your host, Brice, signing out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.